Well, I'm just going to play a little for you first. I'm actually going to play with some tracks of the piece I played yesterday with the band for anybody that wasn't there to hear that Kill Away as Fountains, and then talk a little bit about approach, and we'll get some people up to play. Thank you. Thanks. That was a piece I wrote that's part of a suite of pieces called Songs for the Big Island. And the idea of it is that I'm playing like a hand drummer, so trying to play some rhythms that, syncopated rhythms a drummer might play, but outlining some chords. And there are a couple other movements of the piece, but they don't work as well with the play-along tracks. So that's basically just a MIDI reduction of the full orchestra score when I do that piece with orchestra. So I know everyone's here, they're serious about trumpet and trying to figure out how to play trumpet for your living or your life and just enjoy playing. And so, it's a very physical instrument. It's a very challenging instrument. And so everybody in this room, myself included, wants to figure out a way to make that easier. So I want to give you just some general ideas about my approach to practicing and maybe some tips, whether you're a jazz player or a classical player or you do a little of everything, like I do, tips so you can get to your end musical result more efficiently, more easily, and therefore have more fun when you're playing. So I realized pretty early on that there are a lot of details when you have thousands of muscles working together to make a sound on the trumpet. So I like to try to pare things down to their simplest common denominator. So I have some very simple, focused, easy things to think about when I play, because when you're on stage playing, you're playing for a competition or a concert, you don't have time to think about, the throat entry of your mouthpiece or, how every muscle in your body's working. You just need to focus on playing music when you're playing. So, the first thing that I like to keep in mind is super easy. You've probably heard this since your first day playing trumpet, but it's also very easy to forget and very dangerous to forget, and that is no matter what you play, whether you're playing high, fast, and loud, or slow and pretty, or giant steps, or body and soul, Mahler 5, or the post-horn solo, whatever you're playing, people only hear the sound that comes out of your bell. That's what people perceive. And technique, by definition, is the ability to control your sound on any given note when you're playing. So for that reason, the most important thing that we should be focusing on when we play is the quality of the sound we're making, no matter what it is, and 100% of the time. Now, you all know that. You wouldn't be here and be serious enough to come to something like this if you didn't know that. But if you're like me, it's very easy when you're thinking about your chops or trying to get some lick worked out that you can't quite play. It's very easy to forget that, and you start with the physical approach. Now, that's not to say that trumpet's not a very physical instrument that requires tons and tons and tons of physical conditioning and training. It really requires that, but it's a matter of what your focus is on. And if your focus is on sound, then you're going to get to that end result faster. A good example is if you, any of you teach any lessons? Who teaches? Okay. So, you know, if you're teaching particularly a beginner to play, and you say, go to a piano and play a middle G, and say, you know, match that sound. You might have a kid that's sitting down and be kind of hunched over and take a little breath and kind of force and get that sort of beginner sound out of their horn. But then if you can demonstrate a full sound for them, or maybe play 2 or 3 octaves on the piano so you get a big sound, or say, you know, imagine the sound of a trombone section or 8 tubas and make that sound. You know, because we learn music in the same way that we learn language, because music is a language, it's not like a language, it actually is a language because we use it to communicate, we sort of intuitively know how to imitate sound and execute that physically without thinking. We are built that way as human beings. Our minds are like computers, and if you read anything that Arnold Jacobs has published, that's what his teaching is all about. So you'll see this little kid, when they imitate the sound, the model of sound they're trying to produce, they will sit up straight, take a nice full breath, and make a better sound. It might not be perfect, there may be things wrong, but they will physically be on the road to solving their issues. If you were to approach that by trying to immediately take a beginner and say, now you need, you know, you got to line your ears up with your shoulders, with your hips, with your knees, with your ankles, and you know, talk about embouchure and airflow and all those things that we all have to focus on. If you start from that standpoint, you might get to the end result, but it'll take 10 times longer. And so in teaching some little kids how to play, that's actually where I realized that about my own playing, is that sometimes I found that I was forgetting to remember the sound that I wanted to make at all times. In fact, you know, Doc's here, and you've all probably met or seen Doc here by now. I remember having a conversation with him once where I was asking him how he practiced, and, you know, how, like, you know, because he's so into, you know, designing horns and all that, like what he went for. And he said, oh, it's easy, you know, I spend days and days and days just thinking about the perfect sound, and I mix together, you know, the best sounds I can imagine. And he really likes Charlie Shavers from the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra, and is a big fan of Bud Herseth. And he said, I mix all these sounds together, and then I try to put some of myself into that sound, and I try to come up with this ideal sound. And then I'm like, yeah, you know, I'm waiting for him to say, and then I do this with my corners, or I do this with my, I'm waiting for the, you know, the silver, you know, the magic bullet, right? And he goes, and then I go for that. And that was his advice to me, and it was probably the best advice anyone's ever given me. It's like you hear the sound and you go for that. Not to say, again, that there's not the physical side of it, but it's important to know what your starting point is so you have a goal. Because obviously, if you don't have a goal, you're not going to achieve it. Right? If you put a GPS in your car but you don't type in an address, it's not going to take you anywhere. So we must do that. So I try to remember, especially if things feel really bad when I'm playing, I try to remember to ask myself the question, how did that sound? Or how do I want it to sound? That's a very important, thing to keep in mind. You know, now the other thing is air. We hear a lot about air and supporting the sound and all that. I like keeping that theme in mind. I like to think of, rather than air support, I like to think of it as tone support. So you support your sound. You want to have a buoyant, the most beautiful sound you're able to make on the instrument. But I also like to think of breathing in terms of phrasing. And the reason for that is, as I'm sure all of you know, if you keep the air moving, the lips will vibrate. I don't believe it takes a lot of air to play the trumpet in terms of how much you move. I think you want to be free to move as much as you need, depending on your volume level. But I personally like to take in almost as much air as I can get in, because it adds some natural compression. Because if everyone takes a full breath and just lets go, it comes out on its own. So let's all do that. So let's all sit up straight and just I'll demonstrate, just take a nice breath and just relax and let it out. So I'll demonstrate, just, let's all do that 3 times. Okay, breathe in, let go. Again, breathe in, let go. Breathe in, let go. Okay, so no force. If you wanted to, I saw some of you were kind of blowing, kind of imagining you're playing a phrase like that. But the point is, it's relaxing, right? Everybody feel a little more awake after doing that, maybe a little more relaxed, maybe a little lightheaded if you haven't taken many deep breaths yet today. It helps you psychologically to play better. It gives you, you have more oxygen in your system, so you think more clearly. It helps you focus. It'll help you relax. And then it creates some natural compression to let the air out. Now, I am of the personal opinion, you hear a lot of things on both sides of the spectrum about breathing. You hear a lot of people say, you want to use more air. And then you'll hear particularly a lot of lead trumpet player, commercial kind of specialists that really can play in that altissimo register say, use it, don't overblow, don't use a lot of air. There's a guy, Jim Manley, if you've seen any of his videos, he takes this tiny little breath and he plays like a triple high C. It's unbelievable, And you can't argue with that. I mean, there are 100 videos of him online, just demonstrating how he can play up there, and he's using just really fast air, but he's not overblowing. So you can't argue with that. Well, I think, both sides are true. I think you want to take in a lot of air, but you want to get as much sound as you possibly can with as little force as possible. So what's important is to keep the air free and blow in accordance to what the musical phrase you want to play is. And if I play, I just want to demonstrate something, because sometimes this is surprising to people. If I play like the Harry James I played yesterday, that opening, when I play, okay, so that's a pretty good healthy forte with a little water in it. So a lot of people will play like that and they'll blow. I'm literally blowing about like this. It's about as hard as I'm blowing, and even up high, it's even less, I would say. So, not very hard at all. If I were to really try to just hammer a bunch of air through there, it would. My horn's pretty open. Even on an open horn, it would back up on me, and then you get a lot of force and stress in your sound. So generally, if I want to get a bigger sound, I'll actually back off. So I think more of playing with smooth, easy air. But more importantly, to tie all this together about breathing, it's important to phrase. You'll notice when you have a conversation and you communicate something verbally, there are certain words that I'm emphasizing, that I'm leading to when I speak to you, right? If I were to sit here and talk like a robot and have no expression in what I'm saying, and I would talk about playing, if I talked like that for an hour and a half, first of all, you would start to have trouble understanding what I'm saying. You'd probably want to set yourself on fire, and most of you would probably leave because you would think I was insane, right? So music is no different. It has, we phrase. So like if you're take a happy birthday, you don't sing happy birthday to you. You sing happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday dear Rodney, happy birthday to you. You have a point, so it's like wherever the phrase leads. Well, for some reason, we put this piece of metal and pin our poor lips between our teeth in this piece of metal, and we start playing, with no direction because we don't want to screw up, right? We all have that feeling. I'm sure everyone in this room has done that a million times. But if you learn where to phrase, first and foremost, the sound and the style of the music is going to make sense to people because you'll have a concept of what you're trying to communicate musically. But on a physical level, when you phrase, what are you phrasing with? The sound, but what is it you're physically doing to phrase? You're phrasing with your air. So if I play, so when I phrase to, my air is going. So as I crescendo or decrescendo, I'm doing that with my airflow. You've probably heard, people make the analogy that our lips are like the strings on a string instrument, and our air is like the bow. So if you want to lean into something, you do it with the air. So if you phrase, that means you've got forward direction and motion to your airflow, which means you're not cutting off the air. If you cut off the air when you play, then you choke the sound off, and that's when we start to have response problems. So it's important to keep it moving, but going back to the first of the three simple things I like to think about is if you think about the sound and add phrasing to that, you cover the airflow. Because if you're phrasing with your air and you know the direction you're going to have with the air, you're going to take in enough air to make that phrase when you're doing it, and you're also going to keep it moving, which gives your chops a huge break. You're not starving your chops from the constant airflow when you play. So number one, is to have an idea of what your goal is sound-wise, and then number two, when it comes to air, think about phrasing. Think about that direction, and you will be amazed. If any of you haven't, if some of you are playing, how many people are playing yet today for the competition? Or was everything, I don't know what the schedule is. So a couple people. So for those of you who haven't played, keep that in mind. If it's feeling stiff or you're feeling self-conscious, keep that phrasing going. Know where the direction of every phrase is. I like to mark in my music arrows, lines with a big arrow, so I remind myself where I'm going in the phrase, and I memorize that along with the music when I play. Now the third thing is what ties it all together. So we've got sound, and we've got the idea of airflow and phrasing. The third thing is rhythm. Why is rhythm important? Let's get the obvious answer first. Who can tell me why it matters if you play with good rhythm? Yeah.
If you're playing in an ensemble, you stay together.
Yeah, right. That's the basic function of rhythm. If you're playing in an ensemble, you play together. And also, we all just as human beings, we react to rhythm. Whether or not you like hip hop or not, if you go to the mall and you hear, it's kind of hard not to you just react to it because our heart beats in rhythm, right? So rhythm is a very primal, fundamental thing that human beings react to, and music is structured around that. So when you're playing music, the rhythm of that music really drives how it connects to people. But there's another thing that happens, which is that, when you play any given note, you have hundreds of muscles that have to fire at any time to make a sound. I don't know if you've ever seen, sometimes I geek out and I look at all the creepy X-ray videos you can find on YouTube of people playing the trumpet, and you can see all the movement of the muscles and everything. And there are so many things that have to happen at one time. They have to happen in synchronicity. So rhythm gives you the framework for that coordination. So rhythm, more than anything else in your trumpet playing, dramatically affects your physical coordination. Let me repeat that because it's important. Rhythm, more than anything else in your playing, dramatically affects your physical coordination. I'll give credit to who I learned this from, Tony Scodwell, who is a fantastic trumpet player who played lead with Harry James when he was 19. Designed some trumpets, maybe some of you have tried. He used to come to Minnesota. I played in the Minnesota Orchestra and would play lead on some shows. And the guy never misses. I mean, you hear stories about, such and such never missed, and it's like you hear that all the time, and it's like they could be great players, but everybody misses. This guy, really, I don't know if I ever heard him miss, just unbelievably accurate. So I had to ask him, what do you think about when you play? And he says, that's easy. One thing and one thing only, time was his answer. He thinks about the time, he thinks about the rhythm. And I thought when he said that, I thought that was the weirdest thing I'd ever heard in my life. I didn't understand it until I started doing that and noticed that I missed far fewer notes. And I had also noticed in listening to recordings of myself missing notes and other people missing notes, and then noticing colleagues, next time you hear someone miss a note on a trumpet, which all we'll have to do is go over into the trial room, and you'll hear, amidst all the double high C's, you'll hear lots of missed notes too. Just listen to the rhythm people are playing with, and you'll discover that most missed notes are early. It's a really strange fact, but most missed notes are early. Some are late. Very few missed notes are in time. Maybe if somebody gets tired, and they fall off something, maybe you'll miss notes that way. But I'll give you an example. Let's say I want to play just a simple slur. Okay, that was a pretty clean slur, right? Okay, I was thinking bop, 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 because I subdivide everything that I play all the time. I try to do it musically, so I'm phrasing, but I subdivide everything I play all the time, if I'm playing well. If you hear me cack something, I'm probably not subdividing because I forgot. But if I'm playing well, I do. Now, let me do what a lot of people do. Okay, so I got the notes, but I biffed the slur. Here, why did I biff the slur? Because I moved too soon. I tried to play the E before it was time to play the E, and I wasn't subdividing, so I moved too soon. Same thing with descending slurs. If I moved too soon, well, both of them were kind of sloppy. Let me try better. Okay, that was a good one. Okay, and I was counting. Okay, now I'm just going to move early, and you get the notes in between. So if you don't have a framework for where to move, or if somebody goes bop-a-da, splee-ah, right? When you go splee-ah, think about if you would write that out in music and write the words on top, you would write splee before the downbeat. You go splee-ah, because you tried to go for the high C too soon. So, if you're finding yourself, who's had a day where they just feel chippy? They just feel like they're missing. Okay, if you don't raise your hands, you either don't play trumpet or you're lying, okay? So we all feel that way, right? And I will tell you, it's maybe one of the biggest things in my playing that has helped me is learning to play with better rhythm has really helped me to play in a level beyond my talent, basically, just because it makes me more coordinated. So I would highly recommend, being aware of that and learning to subdivide. I see a lot of students that play really well with a metronome, or if they're jazz players, they play really great with the rhythm section, but ask them to play a tune by themselves, and they haven't learned to internalize that rhythm. So when you're practicing with a metronome, which you should do every day, every single day you should play with a metronome, particularly in your warm-up. To set up that coordination, turn the metronome on first thing to make sure you're lining that up. Play with the metronome, but then turn it off and play without the metronome. And learn to internalize that, learn to be able to do that, and learn to be fluid. Learn to feel the emphasis on different beats. I see a lot of jazz players that will play something that's kind of rhythmically complex and they can't tap their foot on 2 and 4. That's not good. If you're a jazz player and you can't feel 2 and 4, that's a problem, right? And I know lots of people, and particularly classical players can't do that at all. I mean, you see it all the time, like in symphony orchestras, people playing pops concerts, and you'll see all the fiddle players tapping their foot on 1 and 3, and of course, it doesn't swing because they're feeling 1 and 3, So not only do you need to be able to internalize it, you need to be fluid with where you feel the rhythm, and that will help your phrasing. So basically, in my approach, I try to think of the sound. I ask myself 3 questions. Let's say, pick up my horn, sounds terrible, feels terrible. Darn, right? Okay, now it's time to make it better. Maybe you've got a gig to go to, maybe you've got a class to go to, maybe you have a 2-year-old at home that's going to wake up, in 10 minutes, and you've got that 10 minutes to get done what you need to do. We all have busy things in our lives that make us have a strong need for efficiency in our practice. And even if you've got all the time in the world, why spend more time getting an end result than you need? So what I do is I ask myself 3 questions. How did it sound? What do I want it to sound like? Number 1 question, most important question. Nothing is more important. Number 2, am I phrasing? By that, I mean, am I taking in air and phrasing with my air? Because that's what we use to phrase with. And number 2. And then number 3, am I playing in time? How's my time? Is it good? Sound, air, time. They're the basic things that you hear all the time. But there's 3 simple questions. And what I have found with myself and with most people that I have taught is that if those questions are answered and addressed, almost every problem technical problem can be solved by asking those 3 questions. Beyond that, if someone has a problem, that's when you get into, is there something wrong with my embouchure? Maybe my set's a little off. Maybe, maybe my mouthpiece is too big. Maybe my mouthpiece is too small. Maybe I need to look at my posture. Then you start getting into the specifics. But it's kind of like, trying to align your wheels on your car if the engine won't start. You can't start from the little details first. In fact, my wife went to like a business seminar for the guy that, what's that book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? What's the name? Stephen? Covey. Okay. Yeah. And so he does this demonstration where he takes a bucket and he has a bunch of rocks. And he has people put rocks in the bucket. And he brings volunteers up. And they're big rocks and medium rocks and small rocks. And most people can't get all the rocks in the bucket when they try to put the rocks in there because there's not enough space. Except the people that take the big rocks first. They put the big rocks in the bucket, and then they put the little rocks in, and the little rocks fall in between the little nooks and crannies, and then you can fill up the bucket. Well, I just thought that was a brilliant analogy for basically anything in life that you do. You've got to have your set of priorities. So that's why I think those 3 questions are really important in your approach to anything you practice, because then that's the time you go next door and look for the magic mouthpiece, and I'll be doing it just like you guys right after this class, So I mean, we all do it. We're all geeks. I mean, I think most of us are. We like to play with toys. We're trumpet players, and we like to find things that make it easier. But you've got to have the priorities. Now, the other thing is practicing. I like to, when I tell you something I learned, rather than just stating it as a fact, I like to tell you the context in which I learned it so you understand how I came to it. I tore my rotator cuff lifting a swing set and carrying it across a park once, and I was too proud to say it was too heavy. And my buddy and I, who was another trumpet player, were both doing the same thing, and about a year later we both had rotator cuff issues to the point that we could hardly hold our horn, And it was just one of those dumb things, but it was exacerbated by holding the trumpet and also the case, like trying to not let the case slide off the shoulder walking to gigs. In any case, so I went to a physical therapist, and I didn't have to have surgery on it. This is a guy that does physical therapy for the Timberwolves. He was explaining to me that he finds working with musicians really interesting. He says, because it's all like, he said everything musicians do from his medical point of view was like witch doctory. He was like, you guys, it's always the magic bullet. It's this and that, and you want to do this, and there's no system. You guys are just trying to find the answer to everything, but there isn't. He said maybe because there's not enough money that's gone into the research, even though there's quite a bit of physical research in music, but compared to athletics, I mean, they've got it down to a science. And he said, that in a lot of, I'd be curious, some of the military people I see, I'd be curious to know how much of this goes into like basic training and physical training. So if anybody has any comments, I would love to hear that, because I don't know anything about what goes into that. But from a sports analogy, this physical therapist said, they've basically figured out that to say swing a golf club or shoot a basketball, it takes a certain number of repetitions. And he said that number is about 10,000. And he said, for everybody, like 10,000 repetitions to learn something new. And it's not like it's, somebody that's more talented, it might be 3,000, somebody it might be 50,000, No, pretty much for everyone, it's pretty close to in that range. But if you already know how to do something and you're trying to relearn something with a new habit, you double it. So if you can all play a high C, but you can't do it without forcing, but you have practiced and learned a way to play the high C, and it's really easy, and that's the carrot you're chasing, which is basically the thing that keeps me playing the trumpet, is chasing that carrot. That thing I get once, and then, oh man, I can do it once, I can do it again, you go after it. If you're doing that, then you already know how to play the high C, but to relearn how to do it with ease, you've got to play 20,000 high Cs to get it, which seems like a lot, but think about how many notes you play during a day when you're practicing, or even during an hour practice session. So physical repetition is very, very important, and it's also important that you practice good habits with those 3 big things in mind, so you know what you want to sound like, so you're not ingraining bad habits. If I'm trying to play a lick, and I play it, I miss it, 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 I play it, I nail it, yay, I move on. What's wrong with that? I missed it more than I got it. Bingo. So you don't want to practice ingraining bad habits. You want to practice ingraining good habits. So slow, methodical practice until you can get it. So like Rodney Mack, a friend of mine from Philadelphia, Big Brass, is here. And I remember when I was going to Juilliard, he was going to Curtis. And I remember walking around with Lisa Byrne going, and you were practicing the Tomasi. And you were practicing da-ga-da-ga-da-ga-da-ga-da-da. And I remember walking past his practice room. And his cousin, Wynton Marsalis, is famous for doing the same thing. I heard stories about that at Juilliard, that he practiced this way too. I don't know if that's where you learned it, or if you're just smart. But I would go by his practice room, and I would hear, or he was actually out the window, I think, and I would hear da 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 da. So I'm walking around, and I come back, and like 5 minutes later, da 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 da, and then like I'd hear da 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 flaka, stop, then a little slower. You start over, and then 20 minutes later, perfect. And he was just very methodical about the way that he was practicing, and it's a little mind-numbing to practice that way. But sometimes you just have to do that. You have to repeat things, and that's why it's really important that you're efficient in your approach, so you don't waste time when you're repeating things. And there are lots of ways to practice. You can practice slow to fast. So this is then the next category. So we talk about concept. Now let's talk about how to practice. When you're practicing, you can start slow and speed up, and you can practice so that you add a note at a time. So if you're playing, da 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 da, you start da 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 da, and etc. like that, adding to the end. And then you can do the opposite, where you play the end and you play it backwards. So you start. You play the whole thing, and then you start taking away notes at the beginning. And so you basically isolate, and you expand from the front, you expand from the back. That's another way to do it. You can also practice changing rhythms. So dum da 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 da. So you're changing twice as fast between, or you can go the other way. Instead of da da da, you can go da 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 da. So different changes are faster. So there are lots of techniques. I personally tend to just slow things down the whole lick until I can play it and speed it up, because I find that unless it's something that's really causing me a problem, that I can usually do it that way, and I don't need to do all the other stuff if I'm patient about it. So those daily drills you do, make sure every day, here's your practice routine every day. There are 8 aspects of technique. Play high, play low, play loud, play soft, play fast, play slow, articulate, single, double, triple, doodle, whatever, and slur. Do that every day. And there are 3 ways that you play phrases. You play through the range, like scales. You do interval studies, so, if you want to play, if you're practicing your soft playing, I'm going to practice my soft playing 3 different ways. Through the range. Okay, now I'm going to practice it with intervals. Okay, this is a simple exercise. And then you can practice isolated ranges. So then you can play your scales and play. So you isolate all those ranges. So you can write your own practice routines, but just make sure that you cover all the bases. And I've started probably 20 times to write a practice routine book. But then I realized that everybody's needs are going to be different. So the only thing that really matters are that you cover all the bases. So those 8 things: high, low, fast, fast, slow, loud, soft, tongue, slur. Do that through the range, interval changes, and isolated range. And just pick what you want to do. There are a million different things that you can practice. So I ended up not writing anything down specifically, because most trumpet players can, if that's their goal, they can figure out what they want to play. I don't need to rewrite the Vizzuti book or the Clark book to do that. So that might be a good way to organize your practice. And the ultimate thing is, if you're methodical that way and always playing musically with your sound in mind, you're going to get to the end result a lot faster. So you'll spend less time getting greater results. And for me, that's gold as a trumpet player. How about questions about anything that I've said? Any other questions about, and be thinking about also, if they're just career questions about the, Kelly Rawson. If there are career questions about life as a musician too, I'm happy to answer any of those, but yes.
Right after you said rhythm, you said more than anything else,
Yeah.
affects your what?
Physical coordination. More than anything else, rhythm affects your physical coordination. When we miss notes, usually it's because we move too soon for the next note. Yeah, very, very important. Yeah.
I was trying to reconcile, you say practice every day, but if you are a weightlifter, you don't want to lift weights every day because you need to hit it hard and recover, hit it hard, recover. I'm trying to reconcile that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm a big fan of short practice sessions often. So on an ideal day, and it's very difficult, I think, for people to work this out. Actually, it might be easier for students if they have breaks between classes to practice short sessions. But Adolf Herseth told me that he never practices more than 30 minutes at a time, which is kind of interesting to think, and there's a guy with monster endurance right there. But, in an ideal, it would be much better to practice 15 minutes 4 times a day where you're fresh. You don't feel, most people, no matter what you're playing, you're not going to feel tired after 15 minutes, right? So, because during that 15 minutes, you're not playing generally the whole time because you're breathing or turning pages or figuring out what you're going to play next. It's better to do that 4 times a day rather than practice an hour straight. And the reason for that is if you practice an hour and that's it, then you've got, first of all, chances are you could tire yourself out, so you may feel not good by the time you end up playing. You may play till you're shot. And then you have to wait another 23 hours before you play. And there's a lot of muscle memory that goes into trumpet. Back to the physical therapist, it's repetitive training over and over and over and over again to get it right. So if you have that long break, that's not good. So the way to build endurance and strength so you don't feel like you're tearing yourself down is to start with short practice sessions often throughout a day and then build on that. Add 5-10 minutes until the point you get to where you can practice an hour or 2 hours straight. Now, that said, I will, if I have a long show to do, like sometimes I do these orchestral pop shows where I have to play in front of an orchestra, which I end up having to end up just kind of because of the numbers, play a little louder than I usually do, which for me, it makes me a little more tired, for 2 hours straight. And it's a lot of playing. So I will train to the point that I will try to play through the entire show without any rests. So I'll skip the rests to make sure I can do it, just to make sure it's there. And then I will do it, see if I can do it twice. And if I don't always do this, but in an ideal sense, I'll be able to go through the show twice. But even then, if you think about, how much you actually play at one time, playing a concerto or playing a big band tune or a salsa tune. I mean, for me, the salsa gigs are the most tiring because you're just like banging away out there all the time. You don't really play for an hour straight. So if you can do that in a practice room, you're going to have monster endurance. So I guess what I would say is it's better to build on it, but then you can do strength training where you try to make yourself tired and sort of see what your limits are, and you can build that in. But generally, I'll do that maybe up to like 2 weeks before a really big performance, and then I taper off and go back to my usual thing. I just sort of build up that endurance. But the answer to how I reconcile those two things is short practice sessions often. Hard to do, though. Yes?
Is there anything in particular you do to try to, besides outside of like those big things you listed, to try to bridge the gap between doing something like lead playing and then going to do something more like a typical like classical concerto that's much more classical, not lead playing?
Well, I mean, if you're covering all those bases, then your sound is your sound. You want to have a good sound whether you're playing. I mean, the days of like, oh, jazz players don't have a good sound, or you're a lead player, you can be bright and edgy. I mean, Joey Tartell can play, quadruple high Qs, but he can also play a beautiful sound, playing, the Haydn or the Hindemith or something like that. So, those days are over. That's not the age of trumpet playing that we live in anymore. So you're still, those fundamentals still apply to everything you're doing. But in terms of, again, kind of back to your question of balancing it, I think it's a matter of what playing you're doing the most. So if you want to train and cover, I like to have a practice session where no matter what I have to do, I have at least touched on it. So if I have to play some lead thing, then I've at least done some high playing in my routine. If I have to do triple tonguing, I've at least triple tongued something before I get there. But beyond that, you know, usually I'll do that and I'll try to cover that in about 15 minutes of practice in a routine that I'll pick something and then I'll change it, you know, after every couple weeks. But then there's the more specified practice after that. So if I'm going to be playing commercial lead high stuff, I'm not going to spend an hour that day practicing that because I'm going to be doing it. I'll actually do the opposite. I'll do low playing. And when I lived in Montreal for a while, and there's an incredible fourth trumpet player there. He's the second player now. And I was subbing in the orchestra, and I went in the dressing room, and he was back there just screaming away, playing, you know, Clark etudes up there and going up to double high Cs, and, you know, and my first thought was, wow, that's really obnoxious. You know, here's the fourth trumpet player playing all those high notes. And then I talked to him later, and he's like, you know, he was saying, and I'm the fourth utility player in Minnesota, so I later learned what it's like. You know, if you live in the basement where, you know, is like 80% of your job doing that, then, you know, you can get a little spread doing that. You know, if you don't play that low G in a way that you're ready to play a high C, you can really get out of shape in the upper register really fast. So you want to balance whatever you're doing. So it's an equal balance, and that will change. If you're going to be playing Carmen, you know, then you probably don't want to just practice low notes for a week. You probably want to make sure you're doing a little more of the exact opposite of what that is. That answer your question? Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
Easter is coming up, and for people that play in church orchestras, we're looking at playing 3 or possibly 4 services back to back. Church orchestras typically are not professional. Another trumpet player may or may not show up. You don't know until Easter Sunday. The pastor is going to play Jesus Christ has risen today at least 4 times. How do you get in session, in shape for that?
I'll just tell you that just hearing that question makes my chops hurt. Just hearing you ask that question. Because, I mean, I'm sure most people in this room have been in that situation. And I'll just preface this by saying the hardest gig I do every year, without question, is my Easter gig. And so I thought I was smart because I took a gig where, you know, I'm the only guy playing, so, you know, I got a little more for the gig. You know, I'm playing solo trumpet, except that I have to play everything in descants. It's just descant after descant. And when and a lot of times my family goes on vacation right before that, so I just had to give up and start bringing my trumpet on vacation because I had one Easter where, I mean, I barely made it because, you know, church gigs playing descants and hymns where you're playing along and something like that, that is some of the hardest, next to salsa gigs for me, that's the most taxing. So I understand, I empathize with that your question about that. And, you know, but I'll come back to my same answer about, you know, practicing is that you want to build endurance by, it's a lot better to finish practicing and have everything feel just right. I think when you're playing, like I'm sure you've had some days it feels terrible, but some days you practice and you kind of get in a groove and it feels right, right? Now what do most of us do? Man, the upper register feels really easy. I wonder if I can play a high G. You know, I wonder if I can do this, or can I play this on that lick? Oh, this is Tomasi. I wonder if I can play the Brandenburg on my B flat. You know, like all those questions, it's like, you know, it's like, if you're like me, if something feels good, you immediately want to test your extremes and see what you can do. And maybe you're more disciplined than I am that way, but it's very hard not to do that. It's much better when it feels good, you go, yes, time to take a break. And then you take a break and you come back and you have muscle memory when you're playing. You come back to it and it still feels that way. Now that doesn't change what I said earlier about keeping in mind what your goal for sound is and make sure you're phrasing, and all those things apply, especially if it's something intricate, you know, and you're missing a lot of notes, make sure you're playing in time so you don't miss notes. So my answer would be almost everything that I've said up until you asked that question, but specifically I would say stop practicing when it feels good and do short sessions and methodically just build up to it. So like, I mean, what's your schedule like in a day? What is your typical practice day?
Well, I'm fairly regimented at about 2 o'clock, but no later than 4. I go down to the basement and I practice usually for 30 to 40 minutes every single day.
And can you practice other times during the day? Could you do 10 minutes here or there?
Sometimes, but not always.
You know, I've started I've started getting up really early to practice, and that I didn't do before, just so I could get in that first routine, first thing in the day. So what I would say is cut that down if you want to build endurance. Cut it down to 10 or 15 minutes and do that multiple times so you can develop that muscle memory and then add on it. And then when you have that 2 o'clock session, if you can push it to, get up endurance, you push it to 40, 45 minutes. If you get to the point you can play an hour straight without getting tired, you'll be able to play anything. Because I mean, even on a gig, playing a hymn, you don't play every stanza, every verse of the hymn, so you have rest. So there's a lot more rest in a performance situation. Plus, when you have the other instruments, that forces you, when you're playing in tune and hearing things, you have to use your ear on a gig. So have any of you ever experienced practicing something that's really difficult and you get in the performance situation, it's physically easier? The reason for that is because you're letting your ear be the guide, because you have no choice, because you're playing with other musicians. You can forget to hear that. I've only done the Brandenburg once, and I was practicing it thinking, man, this piece is just as hard as they say it is. I was really working and kind of thinking, this is going to be really tough. And then I got in the orchestra, and it was so much easier than practicing, and that really surprised me. And I realized the reason was that I wasn't really listening as if I was performing when I practiced. So all those first concepts I talked about would inform that. But again, practice more often, I think, is the way to build that endurance. And practice the kind of things you got to do. Do a lot of sustained playing. I would also, here's another thing, nobody's asked about this, but I've noticed this because I like to do, when I play music, if I play music by other people, I try to imitate their sound and vibrato. So like if I'm playing, Louis Armstrong or Harry James or Vic Spiderbeck, I try to imitate that kind of vibrato. But in practicing, I would really strongly recommend that you think of vibrato as an ornament to your sound. And when you play and you warm up, play completely straight tone. Play musically and phrase so that you have just basic pure production of sound, and then add vibrato to that later for musical reasons. You can play musically without a lot of vibrato. How many of you have heard the German brass? Okay, if you don't have the album German Brass Bach 2000, get it. It's unbelievable. And they play with these great phrases. It's so musical, but they don't use a lot of vibrato, and it's just a pure singing sound. You get a lot of people that'll play, you get that kind of warm up, and you're doing all of this kind of stuff, and you're going to really mess with your basic production, in my opinion. So I like to play musically, but I like to try to do it without the vibrato, and then I add it. I think of it as an ornament, something I add. And for older, it's hard to play classical music with hand vibrato and sound right. I'm working on it. I don't quite have it. But for like big band stuff, or, I definitely like to do this, so I'm not chomping at things with my lips or my jaw. I just keep the air moving and try to do the hand vibrato. This guy Stuart Lawton, who used to play in Canadian brass, hand vibrato. He's got it down. It's perfect, and it sounds great. And and he's just like a relaxed wind machine. He's just like playing like that. He wants some vibrato. He just moves his hand like a violinist. It works great. So that would be something interesting to experiment with. Other questions, or should we get some? Yeah.
Besides the 8 things, if you really wanted to focus on your salsa gigs, any other thoughts?
Well, not other than what I've said. Basically, just make sure that you're playing that style and that register, and you're balancing. If you're going to be doing a 4-hour gig, don't practice that kind of thing all day. Practice the opposite, so you stay loose and so you stay balanced as a total trumpet player, and building endurance the same way. If nothing else, we should get people that want to play, because I think we got like 40 minutes left. No? Okay, why don't you want to play?
An Easter gig right now.
Well, this will get you in shape.
Fair enough.
So introduce yourself. Let them know who you are and what you're gonna play.
My name's Steven. I will be playing the first movement of the Gregson Concerto.
There you go. That's a good mute. Where'd you get this? We have one that...
This is actually Eric Berlin's mute. He says they don't make them anymore. He won't sell them. So.
Yeah, I didn't think you could buy them. Manny in Minnesota has
Yeah,
one of those.
it's made out of
Yeah, it's a nice mute.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't buy them, I guess.
Well, Eric's stashed 8 of them.
Yeah.
But he won't sell any of them.
Good. I'll stop you there. Very nice. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Yeah, coming in cold like that, no warm up, that's really good. So let's get a couple of comments from people before I say anything. So give me some impressions of this performance. Obviously a great trumpet player, but let's just give me some music critic, like, what was the performance like? Yeah.
I don't know, it was just something minor. The part is like da-dee-da, that part. It seemed like the 16 notes were more pecky, like da-dee-da, da-dee-da,
Yeah.
playing that.
So blowing through the articulation. Yeah.
Okay. Other comments? Yeah.
Something not related to the trumpet. If you make a mistake,
Yeah.
don't make a face or something.
Okay, good. All right, and let's not just picking only negative things, but just the overall impression of the performance too. But go ahead if you had something. Okay. All right. All right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's that. Okay. So that's the comment I was looking for, but also the other comments are reflective of the fact that, I mean, you've got a good sense of this piece, but remember when you're phrasing something and you're phrasing right here, obviously that didn't quite translate out there. It probably translated more to me being right next to you. So, and every time you had a response issue, the phrase stopped. And when the phrase stopped, the air stopped. Like the first soft thing, I'm leading, ba-da-da-dee, right, I know where the direction is, and so I'm doing that with my air. So there's a much more clear direction. Now you did that, but just on such a small level that you cause yourself a physical issue. Now it's not warmed up, it's hard. Also, on the big intervals, really music on the trumpet we should be able to read it that way. So high notes are further out rather than up and down. So you played the phrase of the big intervals just the way that they're written. You played, I don't know this piece too well, so excuse my performance through it. What's the tempo? Bing, bong, bing. Okay. Yay, so I didn't miss anything. Now I'm going to play, and I can still play pretty straight, but have more direction in that. Okay, that was more interesting, right? Did you notice that I played a wrong note? I didn't mean to do that. But did it matter? No, because the phrase is happening. So if you have a solid idea of what you want the phrase to be when you're playing, and you're really emphatic about that, and you really exaggerate it, what will come across will be music, rather than, oh, he missed that note or that note, And so I think if you can focus on that, then you can't really fail. You can miss a note, but nobody's going to care if you do. So I want you to start from the beginning again. And I want to make sure that even from the beginning, ya-da-dee, ba-da-da-dee-da-da-dum. I want to, you kind of played, is that right? Yeah. And what I want to hear is, here I'm leading to the A.
Yep.
There, you kind of went ba-da-da-da-da. I want to hear ba-da-da-da-da.
Got it.
So I want you to play with a point, not play with a point. Play with a point. Play with direction, okay? So, and don't think about anything else, just the phrasing. So, be-ba-bee, ba-ba-ba-dee, ba-ba-bum, ba-da-da-dum-bum, be-da-da-da-da-da-da-dee. And if you're phrasing away, then be very emphatic about that as well. And just really go for it. Just, you know, really be more dramatic and be more commanding with it, okay? Okay, good. Now, so that was much better already, and you know, and part of the reason, you know, is because it's the second time. I mean, if I didn't say anything, he'd probably still play it better the second time. But the reason is, when you correct something, you play with more purpose, so you have a more emphatic way of how you want to play it. Now, the things that technically weren't clean in that were early. You rushed the second bar. Beep ba ba, ya ba ba da ba ba bum, ba da dum bum ba. So now let me kind of conduct it just a little bit to give you to help you with some of the phrasing and see how that works out. Okay, so 1, 2, ready. Nice, keep going. 2. Yeah, okay, stop. Now, let's hear the report on that performance. Let's hear some comments about how that sounded. Yeah.
Seemed like it was going somewhere.
Seemed like it was going somewhere. What else? Yeah.
Because of the direction of the sound, it just sounded full as well.
Okay, yeah. What else?
To me, it just sounded more interesting.
More interesting? I would say it sounded more confident. Okay? So here you have, all you changed was the direction of your phrasing and being more emphatic about your approach to it. And so the comments you're getting from the listener are all musical comments. They're all, mine is confident, more interesting, it was going somewhere, fuller. You know, so that's the kind of review of your CD you want. That's the kind of review of your performance that you want. Yeah. And then if you did that, if you had cacked the last note, I don't think one person would have raised their hand and say, well, he missed the last note. I don't think anybody would say that. You know, so if you can be a musician first and be commanding and dramatic and phrase, you're going to have a better musical result, and also physically you will play better simply because you keep your air moving. You're phrasing with the air. Now let's do the same thing in the soft playing. Let's hear that before 7. Okay, so right here, in slow motion, I heard this. Okay, it's like note, 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 right? I want to hear. So it's a horizontal, it's not vertical.
Yep.
Okay, so. I mean, you can tell by the way I'm playing that E that it's going to go somewhere. Yeah. Okay, so already you lost my interest in the first note. So now play it and take me on a phrase. Take me on the adventure of what this line is, this style change in the pieces. Okay. Now, interesting, so you played that first note like you wanted to make sure you didn't have the response problem, so he did what I do and we all do, is something that was a little bit of a test. It was like, get the no, da, 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 but it wasn't in time. So imagine, you know, you never, with time, you want to, the train's moving, you want to run alongside and jump on like James Bond, right? By the way, I just rented the James Bond movie in the hotel. Has anybody ever seen the last one? It's amazing. It's a great movie. Anyway, the bad guy is really good. But anyway, you don't, when the train goes by, you don't want to just grab the train as it goes by. It's going to pull your arm off, right? So you've got to have the musical phrase going. You're running alongside, you know. And just as an aside, you know, when you got to play something like orchestral excerpts, if you're working on, you know, make sure you sing, you know, ba-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da. You've got the rhythm going, and then you've already played it mentally, and then your first note is ba-da-da-da, you're already running alongside the phrase musically. If you want to have played it through mentally before. So in this case, you want the rhythm to be going. So, ba-da-da-dee, ba. So don't think about the response, think about the time and the phrasing. Yeah. A nice clear attack. You're not playing, you don't have to worry about playing too soft, just play full. Okay, good. And I actually think your response was so good that time that you rushed. Okay. So now you don't have to worry about what's happening physically because it's all going to be right there. So, ba-da-da-dee. Say again. Yeah, and more direction to the E. Keep the sound spinning. Sing more, sing. Nice and smooth. Good. Yeah. So, no question, right? Much more dramatic, much more interesting to listen to. I mean, and it's like, if that was two players, the second one wins the audition or the competition. The first one probably advances but doesn't win. So both players are you. Both are good. But when you play with that kind of phrasing, you play like a musician, like you're telling a story, then not only musically is it better, but it's technically better. And what I would say is you played that last crescendo like you're afraid to lose the low note. You know, and one thing I notice you're doing is you don't need to open up so much when you're playing low notes. Just kind of, I try to think of my embouchure is basically just adjusting to stay the same. I try to move as little as possible. I mean, we all move, you know, but I try to just keep things even. So, you know, I'm not going to go like, wah, you know, when I play the low note. I just try to play. I mean, I'm sure you can see some movement, but I'm not really trying to move. I'm just trying to keep that to a minimum. So I wouldn't worry so much. Can you just play ba-da-ba-ba and just play like mezzo piano, mezzo forte? And as you go down, just stay relaxed. Don't try to change anything. Play the low G kind of like you're playing the D. D, da, da, and make sure you articulate, especially in the low register, make sure you articulate clearly. Okay, so in rhythm, so beat up ba. Let's go back and forth. That was a good one. So that was statement, statement. The four before that were statement, question, statement, question, statement, question, right? So when you're playing, you got to be making statements when you're playing. So you've got to be confident musically in what you're doing, and then physically there'll be a lot less to have to adjust for. And so don't, this the stamp thing of like, when you go down, you go up to go down, you go down to go up. I like that concept. So you're not trying to tighten up to play high notes, and you're not trying to do that to play low notes. You just kind of stay neutral, So if I do this slur, can you do that?
What is that?
G to C, G to E. Okay. He missed the note, and it was what? Bingo. I was subdividing.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay. So now, can you do it and try to keep the sound even? Yeah, just focus on the sound even. Good. So I try to keep that as sort of my general set for my embouchure, like around that E. So that's roughly where I am, and then so for most of my range, I don't try to move a lot out of that. I don't try to necessarily be stiff and hold it in one place, but I don't try to over-adjust. I think you're just over-adjusting a little bit, and I hear it more in the low register than the upper register when you're playing. So I would just maybe just keep that in mind. You're basically just doing too much. And you also, just on one physical level, when you breathe, you're very, you're breathing like you're bringing somebody in all the time. You're kind of keeping the rhythm. You're kind of doing this. It doesn't really matter as long as you get the air in and you're relaxed, but it's a little stiff when you breathe. I'd recommend just kind of trying to be a little looser. You know, because this does not bring air in your body. This does not do you any good. It does not help. You know, so if you're just playing, I'm just trying to breathe and play. Just breathe and play like that. So I would practice just some easy breaths and attacks like that. Just practice some first attacks to just ingrain, again, that repeated physical habit. Because I think you're a little bit controlled that way, and I think that's, you know, maybe a result of how you're approaching the phrasing. So as you're approaching this freer phrasing and being more dramatic in your playing, you know, try to keep that in your technical practice too, that you're playing with a little more freedom with the air. Very good. Sounds great. Thank you. Who else wants to play? Excerpts?
Yeah, I didn't actually compete this year because I just live around here and I thought I could play some.
Sure.
We'll probably compete next year, so I'll just play a few excerpts, I guess.
Yeah, whatever you want. Yeah, anything you want to play. You don't need this. So let them know who you are and what you're going to play.
My name's Sean. I go here, George Mason. And I thought I'd start off with the Pines of Vermont stage solo.
Very good. Very nice. So yeah, nice sound. And just how many beats is the last note?
5.5.
Yeah. Okay. So you cut off a little early. Okay. Yeah. So all the way through the 6 beats basically. I thought it was really good. I thought the phrasing at the beginning was really nice, really confident in singing. And as you went through, you feel a little nervous?
Well, no, it
Or
was
just-
I sort of ran out of air.
Okay. So you got to make sure, you don't have to blow that hard, like I said, but you do want to make sure you take in enough air, particularly the first breath. Because what happens, the reason I like to take in a nice full breath to begin with is because, you fill up, and you play, and then you got to take a quicker breath. So human nature is the next breath is not quite as full. So then our breathing starts to do this, and then you get to that point where you're at your resting point, like you were at the end, and then you're pushing the air out. So then you get a little strain. You heard like there's a little bit of a tremble in his sound. I mean, I'm sure we've all gotten that 1,000 times, playing, because he was pushing, And then he actually physically ran out of air to play the last note. So if you start a little fuller, that's easier. And the other thing is, I like to think of sometimes the release of a note as the beginning of the inhale. So I release, as soon as the note is finished, I'm inhaling. So there's no dead space. So I actually think of, at the end of a phrase, when I start inhaling more than what I do before I play the note. So I take advantage of that full time. So if you're going to go ba, it's not ba, you don't wait and then breathe, you breathe right away. When you started running out of air, you started rushing, so when you went, that got a little bit ahead. So, and when you played the top G, you played it like a test note. You did the same thing, where it was like,
You mean the last one?
done. That one. It kind of was, you did that a little bit. Okay. So there's no testing, so it's the time is going. And, the volume he's playing, by the way, is perfectly appropriate. I think it's marked piano in the part, but it's off stage. So, you could play it forte and, you just be a little further off stage. So you can play that at a comfortable volume. If any of you are taking orchestral auditions, and there might be people on a committee that might not know how loud offstage trumpets are actually played if they're not trumpet players. So I wouldn't play it double forte, but I would not worry about playing it at just a comfortable singing volume, because it's supposed to have a kind of, really, chant-like quality. It should be very singing. So that was a very appropriate volume. So, let me just play, and I'm gonna keep subdividing a little more than you are. I'm gonna phrase a little more and see if this has more shape for you. So it's actually really hard to tap your foot and do that at the same time, but I'm trying to show you I'm going yum, bum, bum, bum when I'm playing. And particularly when you come in on the G, you just got to go for it. Yeah. Sometimes you just got to hear the time, you've got to articulate and play and hope it comes out. Yeah. And 9 times out of 10 it will. But you have to have a kind of blind faith when you play the trumpet sometimes. It's like, instinctively we want to go, I hope it speaks. But if you do that, that's exactly when it's not going to. So can you just try that again? Sure. Try to phrase a little more like that. Breathe. Ti ta ta ya. Yum bum ba 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 ba. Good time. Bye. Ya ba 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 ba. Ya ba 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 ba. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Good. Yeah. So only just a little short, but I mean it was much better, right? So, the idea is when you're subdividing, you don't have to subdivide like the Dr. Beat where it's like 1 and 2 and you don't have to think like that. And actually, anybody have GarageBand on their computer? I like to practice with the shakers on there because they move a little bit. They're a little more human, and so you can practice, especially articulation studies. You'll tend to flow a little more. That's actually how I ended up writing Kill Away His Fountains, that piece. I was just working on my articulation, and I started listening to drummers, and I was thinking, they kind of vary how they're attacking. And if I try to go, that's a lot easier than going with no phrasing, right? If you don't phrase, it's easy to get stiff, but if you have direction to it. So, you can really improve articulation that way. So when you're subdividing, you know, you can subdivide with a very loud internal voice that's very musical with a lot of direction, and the audience can't hear it. I mean, what I was saying out loud is what you should be thinking, but no one ever hears that.
Yeah, honestly, I wasn't really thinking the subdivision. I was more thinking the context of the piece.
You know, and here's another thing psychologically. Yeah, and that's good that you're doing that, but you still want to have that anchor of rhythm, because rhythm, more than anything else, dramatically affects what? Your coordination, right. So like Schumann 2,
Yeah, oh,
you know, if you're playing that and you're not subdividing, it's like, oh my God, is this note ever going to end? But if you're thinking, you know, I mean, you tend to, you know, they tend to lengthen that a little bit. But if you're thinking that, then you're feeling a faster rhythm. So it doesn't, it just psychologically, it doesn't seem like it takes as long. You know, and again, it's all about internalizing it. And for orchestral excerpts and playing by yourself, that's the hardest thing, you know. And, you know, in a jazz context, people get used to playing with a rhythm section, you know, but they'll play, you know, if they, you know, play body and soul without a rhythm section, sometimes you can't recognize the tune because it's so out of rhythm, you know, because they're not used to internalizing what they can do with a drummer. Same thing in an orchestra. I know lots of people that in orchestra play in time, but then they play the excerpts by themselves and they haven't internalized it, so they get used to following the rhythm. The problem with following rhythm is that you're reacting to it, and you're going to tend to react late and then rush to catch up, which is going to make you miss a note. Whereas if you internalize the rhythm and you're laying it out, you're the director of the rhythm, then you're going to be more confident. So you're a time machine even when you're playing lyrically like that. And the other thing about lyrical soft playing, and you only did it the first time, you didn't do it, you did it perfectly the last 2 times, is most people in things like the second movement of the Haydn is a perfect example, miss notes because they under-articulate. They don't articulate clearly. In soft, easy lyrical playing that's really slurred, a lot of people don't articulate enough. It seems like weird to have an articulation problem in something lyrical, but don't forget to have a clear articulation. Don't mumble when you play. Try to articulate. It sounds great, though. That was great. Thank you. Maybe we should do some Q&A. I've got one more thing I could play for you. Any other questions related to, yeah?
Breathing. A lot of times I'll breathe like you said, but also a lot of times I move the concept of just take in enough air to comfortably get through the phrase, or I end up with stale air that I have to get rid of at some point. Well, where do you do that?
You know, I've heard people say that, and I have to say honestly, I've never had that experience. So I don't know if I'm the best person to ask that question, because if I take in a relaxed breath, it just kind of naturally wants to come out. And so, I mean, you know, if I just go, I'm just letting it out. I'm not playing that loud. So that's kind of just the comfortable, natural rate in which the air wants to come out for me. So what I wonder is when that happens, if maybe people are closing off a little bit when they're letting the air out. They're kind of putting on the brakes here, like going, ah. I used to do that when I was a kid. That could be part of it. But I think if it's relaxed in and out, I mean, you know, you breathe. I mean, you would not normally even play as long as I just played. Yeah, so, but you're saying you fill it for short phrases? Oh, because when you...
If I fill up on a short phrase then, and then try to top off again, I'll end up with air.
Well, here's what I say. I know oboe players. They practice a technique where they play, and then they exhale before they inhale. Now, I've heard people talk about doing that on a piccolo trumpet. I would say if you're experiencing that, my advice would be, maybe you are overfilling. I would say 99% of people I say, take in as much air as you can get in your lungs. They go like that, and they're not anywhere close to filling up with air. So, you know, I would say maybe there are some people that actually are very literal and really thorough about how they're doing it. Maybe you are over breathing, and if you feel more relaxed, you know, particularly for high notes, I think sometimes I actually don't I don't actually need to take in as much if I'm playing high notes, and I just want to have a nice, just relaxed, smaller airstream to be more compressed. So maybe you are overbreathing.
And one question you touched up on there. I've got one student who talked about cutting off here, and he's about the worst I've ever had, where it's almost like he can't play without running all the time.
The grunting thing, yeah.
I've tried to help him get out of this, and one way was to say, well, try singing while you play, and then he can't grunt into the horn. But I'm having a hard time getting it out of him.
Yeah, well, you can't go like you're talking about that thing. Yeah, I've seen that. You know, you can't do that without closing your throat. So I think, you know, you have a tendency to air in equals air out. So if you breathe like you're just creating suction by breathing, you know, what I've found will help students is doing the thing to create some resistance, or breathing in like that, using some of those kind of exercises so they get used to having the throat open when they inhale. That will tend to go away. You know, there are a lot of teachers in here. Anybody have any comments about that? Because
I do actually.
Yeah.
One thing our professor has us do is actually practice playing while standing on one leg, which helps use the support more down here. Because usually when there's a close off somewhere else, it means that they're not supporting the right area.
Okay.
I'm not joking.
Well, hey, if it works, play like this. You know, that's all I got to say. You know, if you give me a triple high C, I'll play. You know,
It's weird. He has us do it.
Yeah. Well, you know, I guess what I would say is the bottom line is if you're feeling like if you can't let the air out and you're feeling suffocated, then maybe you're overbreathing. As far as the grunting, that's a little bit of a different issue. You can't make that sound without closing your throat. So I would focus more on a relaxed inhale. And I think, can you do this?
Well, that's the other student. I don't have every now and then I do.
Yeah.
I don't have the problem.
But I mean, you know how to teach that just to get that sound. Okay, so the sound is the air. It's not, people sometimes will go when they do that. The sound you want to let, and even on an exercise, the sound is the guide. You want this sound. That's air. I don't go there unless there's a problem, because then I don't want trumpet players going and then trying to get their chops back together to play. So that opens up another can of worms. But you know, I would say that it's definitely a throat tension issue. Yeah.
Do you take like a slow breath before every single thing that you play, or does it change with what you're doing?
I like to take a slow. I sort of take a double breath. So I will start filling up so that you can't see. Like when I'm playing, you know, that opening thing in Kilauea's Fountains, I like to be able to really kind of wail through the bottom of that phrase. So I'll start breathing so that you can't see it, and then just sort of sip at the top rhythmically. So I'll go. So when I take that second breath, I'm just topping it off. I'm already really full when I do that, and it's hard to see, you know. And I see a lot of great players do that. Like actually, John Hackstrom, when they came out with the Chicago Seas, I saw him. Was trying the horns, and he was standing on the stage, and I asked him if he could, just so I could hear him play. I just wanted to hear what the horn sounded like that. And he said, well, what do you want me to play? I said, well, I don't know, play pictures, you know. And so it was just amazing. He went. I mean, he took, and you know, you hear my sound beefed up a lot when it was a lot bigger that time when I did that. He took so much time to take there, and I was like, wow, I'd never seen anyone do that. And he's like, yeah, I saw Alan Vizzuti do that. You know, why not take as much time as you got in the world to fill up, and then it's hard to breathe like that and be tense, so you just keep it moving. The thing is, playing trumpet, you want to be fluid, you know. And I think sometimes we can get kind of position oriented. The chops have to be in this position. Our posture has to be in this position. But you know, if you look at a basketball player, you know, they're not in the dribbling the basketball position when they run down the court. You know, they're loose and they're fluid like a dancer, right? You know, as a trumpet player, you want to be kind of loose and easy, you know. And you know, and actually some of the groups I've played in where I've had to do like a lot of running around and choreography and stuff like that, which isn't actually my favorite thing to do, but when I've had to learn to do that, it was very instructive to me, because you can't move around and do stuff like that and be tight and play well. you have to be really loose. So it was actually a really great body usage exercise, learning to do stuff like that. So, sometimes if you're playing, just kind of test, make sure your body's loose, just move a little bit, just make sure you're kind of loose, keep the shoulders relaxed and all that. Yes?
Going back to the analogy of swimming or a train that's moving, is your breath, are you saying your breath is not necessarily in time with what you want to play? If the breath is in time, does that help you stay in rhythm?
Yeah, I would say that I generally always breathe in time, but sometimes it's like over a couple bars. I always try to breathe over at least a couple of beats. So like if I'm taking a slow breath like that, I'm actually counting through it. And usually, if it's an entrance in something and the music is going, then I'm just doing it in rhythm to that. Yeah, because I think you want it to have some sort of framework, because rhythm, more than anything else, dramatically affects what? Your physical coordination, right? Yeah, so yeah, I do breathe in time. And then the second, and then when I call it a double breath, I just mean that, I'll just try to pace it, and then just, I do like to kind of get that little top sip before I play. But, if the air is specialized when you blow, you want it to be relaxed all the time, but you specialize how you're playing when you're actually playing. It's not before, you get set up for it, but it's, the specialty of airflow is when you're actually making the sound. Anything else? Should I play another tune? Okay. Hopefully I can figure out how to use the machine here. So this is a tune I wrote with, this is my rhythm section from the CD, but they couldn't be here today, so they're on the CD for me. And it's in Eastern Europe and parts of the Mediterranean, gypsy music is the popular music. It's folk music, but there's a huge tradition of Serbian brass bands that are amazing virtuosos. And a lot of these parties that are called zabavas center around virtuoso musicians. And I thought it was cool that music in parts of Eastern Europe, popular music, is not vocal music, that it's instrumental. So I wrote a piece kind of, Night in Tunisia-ish, based on that, with a lot of that kind of stuff and with a little jazz in the middle. It's called Dancing Gypsy. I think. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for the great playing and great questions and everything. It was a real pleasure. And good luck to everybody. Thank you.